The bus screeched to a halt, and I spotted him, an old man curled up on a park bench, his face weathered and tired. I hesitated, then quietly raised my phone and snapped a selfie, wanting to capture the moment, but never expecting what came next. When I finally learned his story, everything I thought I knew about courage changed forever. Welcome to Dusk Tales. Let's uncover what really happened. It was one of those days when everything feels routine: school, homework, scrolling through my phone. But then, on my way home, something stopped me in my tracks. On a worn wooden bench in the corner of the park sat an old man. His face weathered like cracked leather, eyes closed in what looked like peaceful sleep. His clothes were tattered, faded, but there was a dignity about him that I couldn't explain. I felt a strange mix of curiosity and hesitation. Most days, people just walked past him, avoiding eye contact like he was invisible. But I wanted to capture the moment. Not to mock, but to remember. I slowly raised my phone and snapped a quick selfie with him in the background, careful not to disturb his rest. As I walked away, a question lingered in my mind. Who was this man? What story hid behind that tired face? There was something haunting about his quiet presence that made me want to know more. I uploaded the photo to my social media without much thought, expecting maybe a few likes or comments. But something unexpected happened. Friends started asking questions. Who is he? Why does he look so familiar? And even, is he homeless? The image struck a chord deeper than just pity. It stirred something inside me. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the man on the bench. The loneliness in that picture wasn't just about homelessness. It was a silence full of stories left untold. I wanted to hear those stories, but I didn't know how to begin. Little did I know, that one selfie was the first step into uncovering a remarkable life. A life marked by unimaginable hardship, survival, and courage. A story that would change not only the way I saw this man, but how I saw the meaning of bravery itself. I didn't yet understand that this sleeping man was not just homeless. He was a survivor, a prisoner of war, a hero lost to time. The next day at school, the selfie I took of the sleeping man kept swirling in my mind. During lunch, I showed the photo to a few friends, expecting maybe a simple, cool picture, or who's that? Instead, the conversation took an unexpected turn. One friend leaned closer and said, "That guy, he looks familiar, like I've seen him somewhere before." Another added, "He's definitely homeless. You can see it in his clothes and how worn out he looks." But what struck me most was the silence after those words, a quiet realization that none of us really knew the stories behind people like him. That afternoon, the photo was shared again on my social media, with captions asking, "Who is he? What's his story?" Comments poured in, some sympathetic, others judgmental. But amid the noise, something unexpected happened. A few people mentioned veterans, POWs, survivors of war, and the struggles they face when they come home. It was like a spark had been lit. Suddenly, this wasn't just about a homeless man sleeping on a bench. It was about all the invisible battles that people fight, the scars no one sees. I realized this man could be so much more than what meets the eye. I felt a strange responsibility stirring in me. What if this man's story could inspire others? What if it could change the way we see people society tends to ignore? I wanted to find out more. I wanted to meet him, to hear from him directly, and to understand what life had thrown at him. So, after school, I made up my mind I would go back to the park, find the man, and try to talk to him. I wasn't sure how to approach someone living on the streets, especially someone who seemed so closed off. But I knew this was something I had to do. I had no idea that by taking that selfie, I was about to open a door to a life full of courage, pain, and survival, one that would forever change the way I saw the world. The next afternoon, I returned to the park, my heart pounding with nerves and anticipation. The bench was empty at first, and I started to wonder if I'd missed him. But then, near the far corner, I spotted the same figure, an older man sitting quietly, gazing at the pigeons pecking at crumbs on the pavement. I hesitated, not wanting to startle him. Gathering my courage, I approached slowly and said, "Hi, I'm the kid who took that photo the other day. I wanted to say hello." He looked up, his eyes meeting mine for the first time. They were tired, yet sharp, like someone who had seen far too much but still held onto something deep inside. A faint smile cracked the lines of his face. "You remembered," he said softly. We sat in silence for a moment, the city noise buzzing around us. Then he told me his name was James. Just James. No last name, no stories yet. I didn't push. Instead, I asked simple questions: where he was from, how long he'd been here. He answered quietly, his voice calm, but carrying a weight I couldn't ignore. As the minutes passed, I sensed there was more beneath the surface. When I gently asked if he'd serve in the military, his eyes flickered with something I couldn't name: pain, pride, regret. James nodded slowly. "I did. A long time ago." That was all he said, but I knew it was a doorway. Behind those few words was a lifetime of experiences, some probably too heavy to share all at once. Before I left, I promised to come back the next day. James nodded again, his smile a little warmer. It was the first connection we made, fragile but real. Walking away, I realized I wasn't just meeting a homeless man anymore. I was meeting a man with a story that deserved to be told, a story I was determined to help uncover. Little did I know how deep and powerful that story would become. The next afternoon, I found James sitting on the same bench, his posture a little straighter, his gaze less distant. I settled beside him, careful not to rush or overwhelm. This time, instead of questions, I just listened. James began to talk, but it wasn't about the streets or the day-to-day struggles. It was about another life, a life shaped by discipline, danger, and sacrifice. He spoke slowly, each word measured, as if sifting through memories both cherished and painful. "I was in the military," he said quietly. "Not just any soldier. I served for many years in places most people don't want to think about." His voice held a rough edge, a mixture of pride and sorrow. I asked if he could tell me more, but James hesitated. "Some stories are hard to tell," he admitted. "Not because they're boring, but because they never really leave you." He described long deployments, harsh conditions, and a constant shadow of danger. He hinted at battles, losses, and moments when hope seemed far away. Yet through it all, he carried a quiet resilience. There was a flicker of pain when he mentioned being captured, but he stopped himself before saying more. I sensed the weight of that memory pressing down. "I've lived with ghosts," James said softly. "Some people call it PTSD. For me, it's just life." Despite his hardships, there was a dignity in how he spoke. James wasn't just a homeless man. He was a survivor shaped by trials few could imagine. That day, I realized this story wasn't just about homelessness or poverty. It was about a man fighting battles most never see, battles that linger long after the uniforms are folded away. I promised James the first wouldn't just hear his story. I'd help him share it. But I also knew it would take time. Some wounds run deep, and trust can't be rushed. As I left the park, I felt the beginning of a journey, one that would reveal the true meaning of courage, sacrifice, and healing. James's story wasn't just about what he had done. It was about what he carried inside, invisible to most. Over the next few meetings, he slowly peeled back layers of his life, revealing scars that ran deeper than any physical wound. He told me about the nights when sleep was impossible, haunted by memories that refused to fade. The sounds of explosions, cries of comrades, the cold isolation of being alone in a prison cell. These were not just stories, but daily battles he fought inside his mind. "I lost a part of myself over there," James said quietly one afternoon. "Not just my freedom, but pieces of who I was." His hands trembled as he pulled out an old photograph from a worn jacket pocket, a faded image of a younger man in uniform, smiling, hopeful. But after the war, things changed. The support James expected never came. The VA hospital visits, the paperwork, the endless waiting. It was a maze that only made his pain worse. He felt forgotten, like a ghost drifting through a system that didn't see him. And then came the loneliness. The grief for friends who never made it home. The shame of feeling broken when he had once been so strong. The slow slide into homelessness wasn't sudden. It was a gradual unraveling of a life battered by trauma and neglect. James spoke softly about the stigma he faced, how many assumed that homeless veterans were just drunk or lazy, not broken people who needed help. People don't want to see the hurt, he said. They only see the shell. Despite everything, there was a fierce pride in his voice. He wasn't asking for pity. He wanted understanding, dignity, the chance to reclaim the man he once was. Hearing James's hidden scars made me realize the true cost of war. It wasn't just the battles fought abroad, but the silent wars waged within the souls of those who served. And this was only the beginning of his story, a story that deserved to be told in full. One chilly afternoon, as the leaves swirled around us in the park, James finally shared the part of his story he'd long kept buried. The truth about being a prisoner of war. His voice lowered, almost a whisper. I was captured, he said simply. Held in a cell where the walls weren't just concrete. There was silence, fear, and pain. I could see the shadow cross his face, the memory pressing down like a weight. He told me about the long days in captivity, how the guards would come and go, sometimes cruel, sometimes indifferent. Food was scarce, and the cold was relentless. But worse than the physical hardship was the loneliness, the feeling of being forgotten by the world. James recounted how, in those dark moments, his training and will to survive became his only allies. I had to hold on to something, he said. A hope, a promise to come home. The hours stretched endlessly, filled with moments of despair and brief flickers of courage. James told me about the other prisoners, men broken in body but not in spirit, who kept each other alive with stories and silent strength. I lost some of my brothers there, he said, his eyes glistening. But I promised to live for them. His captivity lasted months, a test of endurance that left marks far deeper than any scar. He described the day he was finally rescued, weak but free, the world suddenly brighter, yet somehow unfamiliar. James explained that returning home wasn't the end of his battle. The war followed him inside, in nightmares and memories that refused to fade. Sitting beside him on that bench, I realized that his silence about being a POW was not shame, but a shield, a way to protect himself from reliving trauma no one else could truly understand. That day, the man I thought I knew revealed a strength I could barely imagine. A survivor not only of war, but of the invisible wounds it left behind. And his story was only just beginning to unfold. James's voice softened as he transported me back to the moment everything changed, the day he was captured. It wasn't a heroic battlefield charge or a planned ambush, but the chaos of war that snatched him away. He described the convoy's route through a narrow pass, the hum of engines blending with the dry desert air. Suddenly, the sky exploded with gunfire. Bullets tore through metal, and the world fractured into chaos. James fought to keep control, but the ambush was swift and brutal. Amid the smoke and screams, James's vehicle was disabled. He tried to rally his unit, but the enemy was relentless. Surrounded, outnumbered, and cut off, they were forced to surrender. He recalled the crushing weight of disbelief, going from soldier to prisoner in seconds, stripped of weapons, pride, and freedom. The captors herded them into cramped trucks, their faces unreadable masks. The ride to the prison camp was a blur of heat, exhaustion, and fear. James's mind raced, trying to make sense of what had happened, wondering if he'd ever see home again. He remembered the first cell, cold, dark, and suffocating. No windows, no sunlight, just the endless ticking of time and the harsh footsteps of guards. As days turned into weeks, James clung to memories of home, his family, and the promise of survival. Every breath became a battle to keep hope alive. I wasn't just fighting the enemy, he said. I was fighting myself, fighting to hold on to who I was. That day, he learned that courage wasn't just about physical strength. It was the quiet determination to survive against all odds, to endure the unimaginable and keep his humanity intact. Hearing this, I felt a mix of awe and heartbreak. The story of that capture wasn't just history. It was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. James wasn't just a homeless man on a bench. He was a warrior, a survivor, shaped by moments most of us can't begin to imagine. James's eyes darkened as he spoke about the torment that followed his capture. The endless days and nights of torture, pain, and isolation. It wasn't just the physical wounds that scarred him, but the mental battles that seemed never-ending. He described being dragged from his cell for brutal interrogations, times when the world shrank to cold concrete walls, sharp voices, and relentless questioning. Each session chipped away at his strength, but he refused to break. "The body can take a lot," James said quietly, "but the mind, that's where the real war was." He told me how he learned to shut off parts of himself, to build a wall inside that protected his spirit even when his body was battered. He focused on memories of home, of laughter and warmth, as shields against the darkness. James spoke of the comrades he lost, some who couldn't survive the torture, others who gave up hope. He carried their names and faces with him, a burden heavier than any chains. Despite the cruelty, James found moments of light. A whispered prayer, a small act of kindness from a fellow prisoner, a glimpse of the sky through a cracked window. Those moments were lifelines. Sometimes, he said, just holding on to hope was the only way to stay human. He explained that torture didn't just leave bruises on the skin. It left invisible wounds that haunted him for years afterward. Nightmares, flashbacks, and a constant struggle to trust again. But through it all, James never gave up. He was driven by something greater than fear, his will to live, to see freedom again, and to honor those who couldn't. Listening to his story, I realized the depth of his courage wasn't just surviving the torture, but surviving what came after, the long, painful road back to a world that felt foreign and unforgiving. James's silence was no longer a mystery. It was the echo of a survivor's strength, shaped by horrors most of us will never know. James's voice held a quiet intensity as he told me about the moment that changed everything, the daring escape that led to his freedom. After months of captivity, he found an opening, a chance that came when the guards' vigilance slipped for just a moment. He described the chaos of that night, how the camp was shrouded in darkness, the air thick with tension and fear. With nothing but his wits and raw determination, James slipped past watchful eyes, moving silently through the shadows. Every step was a risk, every breath a prayer. His body was weak from malnourishment, but his mind was sharp. He knew that if caught, the punishment would be brutal, maybe even death. But the hope of freedom burned too fiercely to hold back. He recalled stumbling through unfamiliar terrain, guided only by the stars and distant sounds of civilization. Hunger and exhaustion threatened to claim him, but he pushed onward, fueled by memories of home and the promise of life beyond those walls. Hours turned into days. James encountered dangers not just from his captors, but from nature itself, cold nights, rough terrain, and the constant threat of discovery. Yet he never wavered. Finally, after a harrowing journey, James was found by friendly forces, a rescue that felt like a miracle after the darkness of captivity. But the relief was tempered by the knowledge that the road ahead was long. Freedom was not just leaving the camp. It was learning to live again, to heal from wounds both seen and unseen, to find a place in a world that had moved on without him. As James told me this, I could see the mix of relief and lingering pain in his eyes. The escape was a triumph, yes, but also the beginning of another kind of struggle. His story was no longer just about survival in captivity. It was about reclaiming life, dignity, and hope after the unthinkable. And I realized then that this man's courage extended far beyond the battlefield. Coming home should have been a celebration, a fresh start after the nightmare of captivity. But for James, it was something far more complicated. The world he returned to was familiar yet strange, changed in ways he hadn't expected. He spoke softly about the first moment stepping off the plane, family waiting, bright lights, cheers. Yet beneath the surface, he felt a growing distance, as if the life he left behind had moved on without him. The war had taken its toll, and though his body was free, his mind was trapped in memories that wouldn't let go. James found it difficult to reconnect with friends, neighbors, even family. Conversations felt hollow, and the laughter around him felt like a language he no longer understood. He tried to go back to work, to pick up the threads of his life, but the weight of what he'd endured pressed down. Nights were filled with restless sleep, nightmares that jolted him awake. Daylight brought moments of numbness and disconnection. I was home, but I wasn't really there, James said, his voice tinged with sadness. The support he expected, the care, the understanding, was slow to come. Bureaucracy and red tape tangled his attempts to get help. The very system meant to protect veterans felt like a maze built to keep him lost. Over time, the isolation deepened. Friends moved on. Opportunities slipped away. The proud soldier found himself alone, fighting battles no one could see. James's story wasn't unique, but it was deeply personal. It was the story of many veterans who returned to a society that wasn't ready to receive them. Despite everything, James held on to one thing: the hope that one day, things would be different. Sitting beside him on that park bench, I saw not just a homeless man, but a warrior who had survived horrors most could never imagine. And yet, he still dreamed of a place to belong. His journey back home was far from over, and neither was the story I was beginning to tell. James's battles didn't end when he returned home. In fact, some of the hardest fights were ones no one could see, fights within his own mind and heart. He explained to me how PTSD, the invisible wounds of war, slowly took hold. At first, it was small things, startled reactions to loud noises, trouble sleeping, feelings of intense anxiety. But over time, the symptoms grew heavier, harder to ignore. Memories would flood back without warning, dragging him to dark places he desperately wanted to forget. He told me about the nights spent pacing his small apartment, trapped in memories of gunfire and loss. The isolation that followed was suffocating. Friends stopped calling, and James stopped answering. The world felt like a foreign place. People don't see this part, he said quietly. They think if you come home, you're safe. But sometimes the war follows you. James's struggle wasn't just mental. It affected his relationships, his work, his very sense of self. He tried counseling, medication, and support groups, but the stigma and misunderstanding were overwhelming. Many veterans faced judgment or disbelief, and James was no exception. Some called him weak or lazy. Others couldn't comprehend the depth of his pain. This invisible battle left him vulnerable, and eventually, his life spiraled into homelessness. Without steady support, the coping mechanisms he'd used in war became chains that held him back. Yet, even in the darkest moments, James refused to give up entirely. There was a flicker of hope buried deep inside, a desire to heal, to be seen, and to find peace. Listening to him, I understood that healing wouldn't be quick or easy. It would take time, patience, and compassion from himself and others. James's invisible wounds were a powerful reminder. Survival isn't always visible, and true courage is sometimes just continuing to fight when no one is watching. James's journey after the war was marked by a slow and painful slide. Despite his best efforts, the system meant to support veterans failed him repeatedly. Paperwork was lost, appointments missed, benefits delayed. The more he tried, the more invisible he felt. He spoke about the day he lost his apartment, a moment that crystallized his fall through the cracks. Medical bills piled up. The rent became impossible. Calls from creditors blurred into a constant background hum of pressure and despair. One by one, the people who once cared drifted away. Family visits became rare. Friends stopped answering calls. The loneliness grew, settling into every corner of his life. James ended up on the streets, a man once decorated for valor, now struggling to survive day to day. He described the humiliation of sleeping on cold concrete, the hunger gnawing at his insides, and the constant battle to stay safe among strangers. Yet, even in this darkness, James carried himself with a quiet dignity. He never begged or caused trouble. Instead, he focused on small routines, collecting bottles, finding shelter, keeping his few belongings close. The world around him often judged without understanding. Passers-by saw only a homeless man, not a veteran who had sacrificed everything. Sometimes it felt like I was disappearing, James said. Like no one cared enough to see me for who I really was. That feeling of invisibility was his harshest wound. The neglect of a nation that had sent him to war but failed to welcome him home. Hearing James's story made me question how many others have been lost like him. Veterans whose bravery was forgotten when a uniform came off. This was not just one man's tragedy, but a systemic failure that demanded attention. And it was this harsh reality that made me even more determined to help James, to tell his story, and to fight for those still falling through the cracks. After weeks of visiting James at the park, something shifted. The selfie I had taken that first day had ignited a small but powerful connection, not just between us, but with others who wanted to help. One chilly morning, as I sat beside James on that familiar bench, a woman approached us. She introduced herself as Linda, a volunteer with a local veterans outreach program. She had seen the photo online and wanted to meet the man behind the story. James was cautious at first, eyes scanning her carefully, but Linda's warm smile and gentle words slowly broke through his guarded exterior. That meeting marked the beginning of a turning point. Linda brought news of resources, support groups, and programs designed to help veterans like James. For the first time in years, he began to feel that maybe he wasn't alone. We formed a small circle around James, friends, volunteers, and people who cared. Together, we started piecing together a plan to help him rebuild. James's eyes brightened when Linda spoke of counseling, medical care, and housing options. She promised to walk the difficult road with him. But more than that, the encounter reminded James of something he'd almost forgotten: community. A sense of belonging and support that war and homelessness had stolen. It was humbling to witness the power of connection, sparked by a simple selfie and a willingness to care. That day, James laughed, a genuine, heartfelt laugh that echoed through the park. It was a sound I hadn't heard before, a sign of hope taking root. This chance encounter wasn't just about providing aid. It was about restoring dignity and trust. And for me, it was a lesson in how small actions can ripple out to change lives. James's story was moving forward, no longer one of despair, but one of possibility. After Linda's visit, things began to change in ways I hadn't expected. Word spread quickly through local veterans groups and community organizations. Suddenly, James was no longer just a homeless man on a bench. He became a symbol of resilience and a reminder of the forgotten heroes living among us. Volunteers started showing up more regularly, bringing food, blankets, and warm clothes as the cold months approached. They weren't just offering charity. They were offering respect, compassion, and a chance at a fresh start. Local shelters opened their doors, and a nearby clinic arranged for James to receive medical checkups. It wasn't a cure-all, but it was a beginning, a thread pulling him back from the edges of invisibility. I watched as James slowly began to open up, sharing his story with these newfound supporters. The weight on his shoulders seemed to lighten with every conversation, every act of kindness. Community fundraisers were organized, raising money to help with housing and therapy. People who had never met James felt compelled to act because his story was real and raw, one that many could relate to or at least empathize with. The media caught wind of this grassroots effort, shining a spotlight on the crisis of homeless veterans. Suddenly, James's story was part of a larger conversation about how we treat those who have served. Through it all, James remained humble, often deflecting praise, but quietly accepting the help he needed. The smile that had been rare now appeared more often, a small but powerful sign of healing. This growing support was about more than survival. It was about restoring dignity and hope. And for me, witnessing this shift was both inspiring and humbling, a reminder that when communities come together, lives can change. James's journey was no longer one of isolation, but connection, and that made all the difference. With the community rallying around James, the next step was ensuring he got the official support he deserved. Linda introduced us to a social worker, Maria, who specialized in assisting veterans with legal and medical needs. Maria quickly got to work, helping James navigate the complicated paperwork required to access his veterans' benefits, something that had been lost in the shuffle for years. The process was daunting, filled with bureaucratic hurdles and confusing jargon, but James was determined. She arranged medical appointments to address his long-neglected health issues, including the lingering effects of his injuries and PTSD. For the first time in years, James had doctors who listened, who understood the connection between his past trauma and present struggles. The legal help was just as crucial. James's case involved backdated benefits, missed payments, and paperwork errors that had left him without the resources he needed. Maria worked tirelessly to get his entitlements reinstated and to secure compensation for the years he'd been left behind. I watched as James's confidence grew with each step forward. The weight of uncertainty and despair lifted slightly, replaced by cautious hope. Still, the system was slow and imperfect. There were setbacks, delays, and moments when frustration threatened to overwhelm. But James was no stranger to adversity. Through it all, Maria was a steady guide, helping him navigate the maze of government agencies and policies. This phase of James's journey was about more than just money or medical care. It was about reclaiming his identity as a veteran and as a man worthy of respect and support. Seeing James slowly piece together his life again was one of the most powerful experiences I've ever witnessed. It became clear that while heroes like James survive battles abroad, the fight for dignity and justice at home can be just as challenging. His story was shining a light on the gaps in the system, inspiring change one step at a time. Word of James's story spread beyond our small community, catching the attention of local news outlets. Suddenly, the quiet man who once slept on a park bench became a symbol of the struggles faced by countless veterans forgotten by the system. Reporters came to the park, cameras in tow, eager to tell the story behind the selfie. James, once hesitant to speak, now found himself sharing pieces of his journey with a wider audience. The media coverage was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it brought much-needed awareness to the plight of homeless veterans and the failures of support systems. Stories of James's courage and resilience inspired people to act. Donations poured in, volunteers multiplied, and policymakers took notice. But on the other hand, the sudden spotlight was overwhelming. James was uncomfortable with the attention, wary of being reduced to a headline or a feel-good story. He wanted his experience to mean something deeper than fleeting sympathy. Still, the coverage sparked conversations in homes, schools, and government offices. The public began demanding accountability and reform. Veterans organizations used James's story as a powerful example in their campaigns. The media also uncovered other veterans facing similar struggles, shedding light on a systemic issue rather than isolated cases. Through interviews and documentaries, James's voice grew stronger, his story no longer silent, but a catalyst for change. Watching this unfold, I realized how a single photo, one act of curiosity, could ignite a movement. James's journey had transformed from a personal battle into a collective call for justice. And though the road ahead remained long and uncertain, the hope was undeniable. His story wasn't just his own anymore. It belonged to every veteran fighting to be seen, heard, and helped. Amid the growing media attention and community support, a surprising call came. James's family had been found. For years, he had been estranged, the wounds of war and years of silence creating a gulf too wide to cross. His niece, Sarah, reached out, driven by the stories she'd seen and the hope of reconnecting with the uncle she barely knew. The reunion was bittersweet. Years lost, words left unsaid, but a powerful desire to heal. When they finally met, James was overwhelmed. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time in years, James felt a sense of belonging beyond the park bench. Family photos were shared, stories exchanged, and old memories pieced together. Sarah brought news of relatives who had never stopped searching or hoping. It wasn't an easy path. Trust had to be rebuilt, and scars ran deep. But the reunion marked a turning point. James was no longer isolated. The support of family, combined with the community's efforts, gave him strength to face the challenges ahead. Together, they began making plans for a new chapter, one where James could feel grounded, safe, and loved. This moment reminded me how vital connection is for healing, not just professional help, but the embrace of those who care. James's story, once one of loneliness and loss, was now also about restoration and hope. It was a testament to the resilience not just of a veteran, but of a family willing to fight for one another. And as the days passed, I saw James slowly reclaim pieces of a life he thought was lost forever. With the media spotlight shining brighter, not everyone welcomed James's story with open arms. As news spread, skepticism and harsh judgments began to surface, casting shadows over the progress we'd made. Some doubted the truth of his military service. Online forums were filled with comments accusing James of exaggerating or faking his past, a heartbreaking blow for a man who had endured so much. Stolen valor. One person typed harshly, "Why should we believe a homeless man claiming to be a war hero?" The backlash stung deeply. James felt the weight of public doubt crushing his spirit, as if years of sacrifice could be dismissed so easily. I saw how the attacks unsettled him, making him question whether sharing his story was worth the pain. Friends and supporters rallied around him, fighting misinformation and defending his honor. Veterans organizations stepped in to verify his records and publicly confirm his service. But the damage lingered. The skepticism was a reminder that society often struggles to believe those who don't fit neat narratives, especially when those stories come from the margins. James's experience taught me that truth is powerful, but isn't always enough to silence doubt or prejudice. Despite the challenges, James refused to retreat. He stood firm, his resolve growing stronger with every insult. He began speaking out not just about his own story, but about the broader issues veterans face: stigma, misunderstanding, and neglect. His voice became a beacon for others struggling in silence. Facing public skepticism wasn't easy, but it was part of the fight for justice and recognition. Through it all, James showed me that courage isn't just surviving hardship, it's standing tall in the face of disbelief. His journey was a lesson in resilience, reminding us all that every voice deserves to be heard, no matter how hard the world tries to silence it. Despite the public skepticism, James found healing in sharing his story. Slowly but surely, he began speaking openly about his experiences, not just the battles abroad, but the struggles at home, the invisible wounds, and a long road to recovery. He started attending veteran support groups, where he connected with others who understood the pain and isolation he'd faced. In those rooms, surrounded by people who shared similar stories, James found a sense of belonging he hadn't felt in years. Sharing wasn't easy. Reliving the trauma meant opening old wounds. But with each conversation, he felt lighter, more in control of his past instead of being controlled by it. He also began speaking at local schools and community events, using his story to educate others about the realities of war, PTSD, and homelessness. His honest, humble voice touched many hearts and broke down barriers of misunderstanding. James's willingness to be vulnerable inspired others to share their own stories, creating a ripple effect of healing and awareness. For me, watching James transform from a silent sufferer to a powerful advocate was awe-inspiring. It showed the strength that comes not just from survival, but from courageously facing one's pain and using it to help others. His story became a bridge, connecting veterans to communities, pain to hope, and silence to understanding. Healing, James realized, wasn't just a personal journey. It was a collective one, and through sharing, he reclaimed not just his past, but his future. This journey with James changed me in ways I never expected. What began as a simple selfie had evolved into a powerful lesson about courage, empathy, and the complexity behind every face we pass on the street. Before meeting James, I saw homelessness as a problem far removed from my own life, something to scroll past or ignore. But his story shattered every stereotype I held. I learned that bravery isn't always loud or visible. Sometimes it's silent endurance. Witnessing James face his past and present struggles taught me about resilience in its purest form. His ability to keep moving forward, even when the world seemed against him, showed me the true meaning of strength. I also realized the importance of listening, really listening, without judgment or assumptions. Everyone has a story worth hearing, and sometimes all it takes is one person willing to care. Through helping James, I discovered the power of community and the ripple effect one act of kindness can create. What started as a curiosity sparked support that reached far beyond us. This experience reshaped my understanding of justice, not just the legal kind, but human justice, the need for compassion, dignity, and recognition for those forgotten. Most importantly, I grew into someone more aware, more responsible, and more hopeful. I learned that change often begins with a single step, a single conversation. James's journey became intertwined with mine, and together we were part of something bigger, a movement toward healing and respect for veterans and the homeless alike. I don't know where this path will lead next, but I'm committed to walking it, knowing that behind every person is a story waiting to be told. James's journey wasn't just about reclaiming his own life. It became a legacy for others still struggling. As he gained strength and support, he felt a deep calling to help veterans facing similar battles. He began volunteering with local shelters and outreach programs, offering not just aid but understanding. His presence alone was a beacon of hope, proof that healing was possible. James shared his story with fellow veterans who had become lost in the system, listening to their struggles and guiding them toward resources he wished he'd known about earlier. Through his efforts, a small network of support grew, connecting homeless veterans to housing, medical care, and community. His impact reached beyond immediate aid. James inspired conversations about how society views veterans and the responsibility owed to those who served. He worked with advocacy groups, pushing for reforms in benefits, mental health care, and homelessness prevention. James's legacy became a bridge between generations of veterans, passing on lessons of resilience and the importance of community. For me, seeing him transform from someone fighting to survive into a leader fighting for others was humbling and inspiring. He proved that true heroism isn't just about battles fought abroad, but battles fought at home, battles for dignity, justice, and belonging. James's story continues to ripple outward, reminding us all that no one who serves should ever be forgotten. With his newfound purpose, James began to envision a future he hadn't dared to dream of before. The community's support and his own determination fueled plans for stability and growth. He found a small apartment through a veterans housing program, a space he could finally call home. It was modest but clean, a stark contrast to the park bench that had been his world for so long. Moving in was both liberating and intimidating. The quiet walls echoed with memories, but also with promise. For the first time in years, James had a place to heal fully. Job training programs helped him explore new skills. Though his body bore the marks of war, his mind was sharp and ready to contribute. He volunteered at a local veterans center, eager to give back. James's daily routine shifted from survival to living. He attended counseling sessions regularly, learning tools to manage PTSD and rebuild his confidence. Family visits became more frequent, filling the gaps left by years apart. Laughter and shared meals replaced silence. The journey was far from easy. Setbacks and bad days still came, but James faced them with growing resilience and support. For me, witnessing this transformation was a powerful reminder that hope isn't just a feeling. It's a series of choices, actions, and second chances. James wasn't just rebuilding a life. He was building a future, one with dignity, purpose, and connection. His story showed me that with the right support and compassion, even the deepest wounds can begin to heal. And as James looked toward tomorrow, he wasn't alone. A community, a family, and a newfound strength walked with him every step of the way. The community support culminated in a ceremony to honor James's service and raise awareness about homeless veterans. It was a day filled with emotion, respect, and recognition long overdue. Local officials, veterans groups, friends, and family gathered in a small park near where James had once slept. The air buzzed with a mix of celebration and solemn remembrance. James stood tall, dressed in a clean jacket with his old military pins carefully pinned to his chest. For him, it wasn't about glory, it was about acknowledgement, healing, and justice. Speeches honored his courage, sacrifice, and the resilience of all veterans who face hardship after serving their country. The mayor spoke about the community's commitment to supporting veterans and addressing homelessness. When it was James's turn, his voice was steady but humble. He spoke about survival, not just on the battlefield, but the fight to reclaim dignity and belonging. He thanked those who had stood by him and called for continued support for veterans still struggling. The ceremony included a plaque dedication, a permanent reminder that no veteran should be forgotten. It symbolized the community's vow to remember and act. For me, witnessing James receive this recognition was deeply moving. It was the moment his story came full circle, from a homeless man ignored to a respected member of a caring community. The event sparked renewed energy for advocacy and support programs, inspiring others to get involved. James's honor wasn't just personal. It was a beacon for all veterans fighting invisible battles. That day, I realized that justice and healing often come through acknowledgement and the collective promise to never forget. James's journey showed that honoring service means more than medals. It means standing with those who served every day, in every way. The months that followed were filled with quiet hope and steady progress. James had come so far, from a homeless man sleeping on a park bench to a symbol of resilience and healing in our community. His small apartment became a sanctuary filled with photos of family, friends, and memories both old and new. The walls echoed with laughter, stories, and the promise of a future he once thought impossible. James continued to share his story, using it to inspire others and push for change. But more importantly, he found peace in the everyday moments, a morning coffee, a walk in the park, the warmth of a genuine smile. Our friendship grew too, rooted in mutual respect and the shared journey we had taken. I saw a man who had faced unimaginable hardships, but who never lost his humanity. On a crisp autumn day, we visited the park bench where it all began. James sat quietly, his eyes reflecting a calm strength. "This place," he said softly, "reminds me how far I've come." Looking back, that simple selfie was the first step toward this new beginning for both of us. It taught me the power of seeing people beyond appearances and the profound impact of compassion. James's story is a testament to survival, dignity, and the healing power of community. It reminds us that no one is truly invisible, and every life has value. As he looks toward the future, James carries with him the scars of the past, but also the light of hope. His journey is far from over, but now it's a journey shared, with family, friends, and a community that stands beside him. And for anyone out there feeling lost or unseen, James's story offers a simple truth. It's never too late for a new beginning.